My dad gave my brother the entire inheritance from Grandpa. Then my mom handed me an envelope. The lawyer's office smelled like lemon cleaner and old paper. Not in a comforting way. In the way that tells you the furniture has been in the same place for 20 years, and nobody wants to admit time moves forward. My brother Ethan sat with his ankle crossed over his knee like he owned the room. His suit jacket was unbuttoned. His watch flashed every time he moved his hand, and he kept checking his phone like the meeting was an inconvenience. Dad sat beside him, shoulders squared, jaw set. He wore the same charcoal blazer he wore to every serious family thing. Funerals, graduations, anytime people were watching. He didn't look at me when I walked in. My mom, Elena, was quiet in the chair across the aisle. Her hands were folded in her lap. She'd been doing that a lot since Grandpa died, hands together like she was holding something invisible in place. I sat in the last available chair near the door, the one that made you feel like you were supposed to leave. Quickly, the attorney, Mr. Sakay Klein, had a neat stack of folders arranged like he was preparing for a presentation. He nodded politely at me, then looked at Dad. "Thank you for coming," he said, and then he used the kind of gentle voice professionals use when they've seen families fracture over money so many times it's just another Tuesday. We were there for Grandpa's estate. I hadn't expected much. Grandpa wasn't flashy. He didn't wear expensive suits or drive a new car. He lived in the same one-story house in Cedar Ridge for 46 years. The biggest luxury he allowed himself was the coffee grinder that made a noise like a lawnmower every morning at 6. But he was careful. He worked in municipal maintenance for decades and invested quietly. He fixed things instead of replacing them. He paid off his mortgage early and never told anyone. Even Dad. When Grandpa died in October, it wasn't sudden, but it still rearranged the air in our family. Like someone turned down the volume on everything. Even the jokes came out thin. In the weeks after, Dad handled everything. He always did. He called it taking care of business. He made lists. He told my mom what time to be where. He told Ethan what to wear. He told me I didn't need to worry about any of it because I had enough on my plate. That was how Dad spoke to me, like I was a fragile item he didn't want to carry. I was 28 days. I worked as a contracts coordinator at a construction firm downtown. I paid my own rent. I'd helped Grandpa with his bills when his eyesight got worse. I'd driven him to appointments. I'd sat at his kitchen table on Sundays while he ate oatmeal and told me stories about jobs that didn't exist anymore. But in Dad's mind, responsibility looked like confidence. And confidence looked like Ethan. Ethan had been confident since he learned how to talk. He told people he was in finance. Technically true. He sold insurance products and posted motivational quotes on LinkedIn about building generational wealth. His profile photo looked like a campaign poster. He had a way of turning every conversation into a stage. He'd always been Dad's favorite. Not because Dad said it outright. He didn't need to. You could see it in the way Dad laughed at Ethan's stories, even when they weren't funny. In the way Dad asked Ethan's opinion on things, like it was expert testimony. In the way Dad introduced him to people. My son, Ethan, he's going places. When Dad introduced me, he usually said, "This is my daughter, Mara. She's doing well." She's steady. Steady was his word for me. The safe one. The one who wouldn't embarrass him. The one who didn't need anything, which meant I didn't get anything. Mr. Klein cleared his throat and opened the folder. "Your father requested we review the final distribution today," he said. Dad nodded, expression unreadable. Ethan leaned back, hands behind his head like he was about to watch a movie. My mom didn't move. I stayed still. If you grow up in a house where your emotions are treated like a problem to manage, you learn early that silence is protection. Mr. Klein adjusted his glasses. As per the documentation filed, the primary beneficiary of Harold Bennett's estate is... He paused, and Ethan smiled before the name was even said. Ethan Bennett. Ethan didn't say thank you. He just exhaled through his nose, like it was the natural order of things. Dad's eyes finally flicked to me, brief and assessing, as if gauging whether I'd cause a scene. I didn't. Mr. Klein continued, voice neutral. The estate includes the Cedar Ridge property, valued at approximately $380,000. There are investment accounts totaling, he glanced down, $812,000. Ethan's eyebrows rose. Dad's mouth tightened for half a second before smoothing out again. Mom's fingers pressed together harder. Mr. Klein continued. Listing items. A small annuity. A vehicle. Personal property. He spoke in the careful cadence of someone reading a weather report, but every number landed like a weight. Ethan chuckled quietly, almost to himself. Grandpa was sitting on that much, he murmured. Dad didn't correct him. Dad looked pleased, in a contained way, like he'd just confirmed something about his family narrative, like he'd been right to place his bets on the son who understood money. I watched the lawyer's hands as he flipped pages. I watched the line of printed text in front of him, the officialness of it. I waited for my name. It didn't come. Mr. Klein reached the end, closed the folder, and folded his hands. That concludes the distribution, he said. Is there anything you'd like clarified? Ethan leaned forward. So, it's all clean? No surprises? Mr. Klein's eyes flicked briefly toward my mom, then back to Ethan. Everything is in order with the documents provided, he said carefully. Dad nodded, satisfied. I looked at Dad, not accusingly, not dramatically, just a simple look that asked a question without words. Was that really it? Dad responded the way he always did, by making it about my character. Mara, he said with a faint sigh, like I was exhausting before I spoke. You know your grandfather loved you. This isn't personal. Ethan's grin stayed in place. Dad added, Ethan has more on his shoulders. He has the drive to handle these assets responsibly. It makes sense. The phrase "it makes sense" was Dad's favorite tool. He used it like a gavel. Ethan's voice went soft, performative. Hey, he said, turning to me with an expression that looked kind if he didn't know him. You'll still be taken care of. We're family. Family. The word people use when they want you to accept something you didn't choose. I didn't argue. I didn't ask why Grandpa would do that when he'd spent so many Sundays telling me I want things to be fair when I'm gone. I didn't remind them that Grandpa had once told Ethan, directly in front of all of us, that money didn't make you smart, it just made you louder. I only nodded. Once. Because I'd learned something about my brother. He didn't just want things. He wanted the story of things. He wanted the audience. He wanted to feel chosen. And my father loved anything that looked like success, even if it was hollow. Mr. Travis talked to Palmadiva. Klein stood, signaling the meeting was over. Dad shook his hand. Ethan shook his hand with extra enthusiasm, like a politician. My mom rose slowly. Her face was calm, but her eyes weren't. She didn't look at the lawyer. She didn't look at Dad. She looked at the folder as if she wanted to set it on fire with her gaze and couldn't afford to. We walked out to the parking lot, the afternoon light too bright for what had just happened. Ethan pulled out his phone before we even reached our cars. I should post something, he said, thumb already moving. You know, honoring Grandpa. People appreciate that. Dad gave a small laugh. Maybe wait until after the service. There's a service next week, Ethan said. That's forever in internet time. He said it jokingly, but he meant it. My father liked the idea of his son being admired. He didn't stop him. My mom stood beside me, silent. Her shoulder was close enough that I could feel warmth through her coat. She didn't touch me, but it felt like she was holding position, like she was bracing. Dad turned toward me. You're okay, he said. Not a question. A statement he could use later as proof. I kept my voice even. I'm fine. That was the only answer he respected. Ethan slid into his car, still smiling. Dad followed, already discussing plans, account transfers, property titles, the kind of logistics that made him feel in control. I walked with my mom toward her car. She didn't speak until we were inside. Doors closed, the outside world muted. She put both hands on the steering wheel and stared straight ahead for a long moment. Her breathing was steady, controlled, the way you breathe when you refuse to break in front of people who would use it against you. Then she reached into her purse, not hurried, not dramatic, like she'd rehearsed it. She pulled out a plain envelope. No writing. No label. Just thick paper slightly worn at the edge. She held it out to me. I need you to take this, she said. Her voice wasn't shaky, it was firm, quiet. I didn't reach for it right away. I looked at her hands. They were steady, but there was tension in the way her fingers held the envelope, like she was passing me something heavier than paper. What is it? I asked. She swallowed once. It's from your grandfather, she said. He told me to give it to you only after your father did what he was going to do. The words landed clean and cold in the space between us. Outside the windshield, Dad's car pulled out of the lot. Ethan's followed behind it. My mom didn't look at them. She kept the envelope extended toward me, her eyes on mine. "Not here," she added. "Don't open it in front of anyone, promise me." I stared at the envelope, then at her face. For the first time since Grandpa died, something in her expression looked like certainty instead of endurance. I reached out and took it. The paper was thicker than I expected. I slid it into my bag without opening it. My mom exhaled like she'd been holding her breath for weeks, and I sat there, calm on the outside, while the shape of the day rearranged itself in my mind. Grandpa's careful habits, Dad's confidence, Ethan's grin, the lawyer's brief glance toward my mother. I didn't say anything else. I didn't cry. I just held the weight of what I hadn't opened yet and chose silence over reaction. Because for the first time in a long time, silence didn't feel like losing. It felt like waiting. And as my mom started the car and pulled away, I could feel the envelope in my bag like a pulse, like a timed lock that had finally clicked into place. I didn't know what it said, but I knew one thing. Grandpa had expected this. I didn't open the envelope that night. I set my bag on the kitchen counter, took off my coat and made dinner the way I always did. Rice, steamed vegetables, something simple that didn't require attention. I moved through the motions on purpose. I wanted my hands busy while my mind stayed still. The envelope stayed in my bag, leaned against the fridge like it was watching me. When I finally took it out, I didn't sit down. I stood at the counter, light above the sink humming faintly, the city outside my window reduced to soft rectangles of yellow and red. The paper tore cleanly. Inside was not a letter. It was a stack, 3 folded documents, clipped together. A USB drive taped to the back with a strip of yellowing painter's tape, and a smaller envelope tucked between the pages with my name written on it in Grandpa's careful block letters. I opened the small envelope first. "Mara, if you're reading this, then your father did what I thought he would. Don't be angry. Just be thorough." That was all. I set the note down and unfolded the first document. It was a copy of a trust. Not a will, not a letter of intent. A legally filed trust, notarized and dated 18 months before Grandpa died. The name at the top wasn't Ethan's. It was mine. The trust named me as the sole beneficiary of a separate set of accounts and property transfers held outside the main estate. The language was clean, professional, no emotion, just instructions. I flipped the page, account numbers, bank names, a property ID tied to a small commercial lot on the edge of Cedar Ridge. Something I vaguely remembered Grandpa mentioning once years ago when he talked about a piece of land that might be useful someday. The amounts weren't as large as what Ethan had just inherited, but they weren't small. I sat down. The second document was a timeline. Grandpa's handwriting, dates, notes. June 12th to Ethan asked about the house, pretended it was a joke. August 3rd, Daniel. Dad wanted me to simplify things. December 19th, changed access codes. Elena knows where copies are. The third was a letter addressed to my mom. It wasn't long, but it explained everything. Grandpa had noticed over the last few years how often Dad and Ethan talked about his assets like they were already theirs. He wrote about overhearing conversations, about Ethan helping him review accounts and suggesting changes that would make things easier on the family. He wrote about the afternoon Ethan had offered to drive him to the bank and came back with new signature cards for convenience. He didn't accuse them of theft. He just said he didn't like the direction things were going, so he split his estate. The visible part, the house, the main accounts, he left to Ethan. He wrote that he wanted to see what they would do when they thought they'd won. The rest, the quieter part, the part that required patience and attention. He put in a trust under my name, with my mom as the only other person who knew. "Because Mara pays attention," he wrote, "and because Elena knows how to wait." My throat tightened, but I didn't let it go further than that. I picked up the USB. I plugged it into my laptop. Folders opened on the screen. Scans of emails, audio files, screenshots of bank portals, photos of documents taken on Grandpa's old flip phone, blurry but readable. Grandpa hadn't just been careful. He'd been documenting. I closed the laptop without opening anything else, not because I didn't want to see it, but because I understood what he'd meant in the note. Don't be angry, just be thorough. The next week, Ethan became a local headline. Not in the newspaper. On Facebook, he posted a long tribute to Grandpa, complete with photos of them fishing when Ethan was 10, a shot of Grandpa at Ethan's college graduation, a picture of the Cedar Ridge house at sunset. He ended it with, "Carrying on your legacy. I won't let you down." The post got hundreds of likes, comments about what a good grandson he was. How proud Grandpa would be. Dad shared it. I didn't. At the service, Ethan stood at the front and spoke about responsibility and family values. He thanked Dad publicly for teaching him how to lead. People nodded. People cried. My mom and I sat in the third row. She kept her hands folded. I kept my face still. Afterward, in the parking lot, Dad pulled me aside. "You should talk to your brother," he said. "He's under a lot of pressure now, managing everything." I nodded. That night, I started opening the files. I made folders of my own, labeled them by date, by account, by conversation. I listened to audio Grandpa had recorded on his phone, Ethan explaining how moving money between accounts would just be temporary, how Dad would make it official later. I read emails from Ethan to Grandpa, written like favors, worded like obligations. "Let me help you, Grandpa. Dad says this will make probate easier. I already filled most of it out. You just need to sign." I didn't forward anything. I didn't screenshot anything yet. I just organized. Meanwhile, Ethan got louder. He listed the Cedar Ridge house for sale within a month. He hosted a celebration of life dinner at a restaurant downtown and invited business contacts instead of family friends. He talked openly about reinvesting the capital. Dad started introducing him as a property owner instead of in finance. Ethan offered me help. "Hey," he said, one afternoon dropping by my apartment unannounced, "if you ever need anything, you know I've got resources now." He said it casually, leaning against my doorway, looking around like he was mentally upgrading my furniture. "I'm good," I said. He smiled in a way that suggested he didn't believe me. Mom stayed quiet, but sometimes, when Dad and Ethan weren't around, she'd ask small, precise questions. "Did you check the Cedar Ridge property transfer yet? Do you have the dates on the bank changes?" She never said why. She didn't have to. 2 months after the service, Ethan invited the whole family to a dinner at his place. Not the Cedar Ridge house, a new condo downtown. Glass walls, city view. He'd moved fast. Dad was proud in a way he couldn't hide. "This is what initiative looks like," he told me in the elevator. Ethan gave a tour, talked about the market, talked about future plans, mentioned legacy twice. At dinner, he raised a glass. "To Grandpa," he said, "for believing in me." Everyone clinked! I sipped water. Later, when Dad and Ethan were on the balcony discussing next steps, Mom came into the kitchen with me. She leaned against the counter. "Are you ready?" she asked. "Almost," I said. She nodded. The key receipt came 3 days later. I was reviewing a folder I hadn't opened yet. Bank access logs. Grandpa had exported them before he died. One login stood out. A date after Grandpa had been hospitalized, a time when he'd been unconscious. The IP address wasn't Grandpa's house. I ran it. It matched Ethan's condo. I sat back in my chair and stared at the screen. Unauthorized access. Account modifications. A transfer attempt that had failed because Grandpa had already changed the authorization settings. I didn't feel satisfaction. I felt clarity. That night, Ethan sent a family group text. "Big announcement soon. Everyone should be there." He added a calendar invite. A family gathering at the Cedar Ridge house, the house he had just sold but still had access to. He planned to make a show of it. I accepted the invite, and I copied the access logs into a new folder labeled simply Public. The Cedar Ridge house hadn't changed. That was the first thing I noticed when I pulled up. Same low brick exterior. Same wind-chipped mailbox with the faded number 4. Same oak tree in the front yard that Grandpa used to complain about because its roots never respected boundaries. Ethan had decorated. String lights hung across the porch. A rented banner stretched between the columns. Family, legacy, new beginnings. There were cars lining both sides of the street. Not just relatives. People from Ethan's work, Dad's colleagues. A few neighbors who recognized the house and came out of curiosity. Ethan didn't want a gathering. He wanted an audience. I parked down the block and walked up slowly. I could hear music through the open windows. Some instrumental playlists meant to sound sophisticated without being distracting. Mom met me at the gate. She looked composed.
Navy Co.
Hair pulled back, the same expression she'd worn at the lawyer's office. You brought it? She asked quietly. I nodded. My laptop was in my bag, the USB in my pocket. Printed copies in a folder tucked against my side. We walked in together. Dad was near the living room, holding court. He was telling a story about Grandpa teaching Ethan the value of property ownership, which wasn't a story I remembered, but nobody challenged him. Ethan stood near the fireplace, drink in hand, smiling like a host on a late-night show. He greeted people with practiced warmth, introduced Dad as my biggest supporter. The house smelled like catered food. Someone had moved Grandpa's old armchair out of the corner to make space for a high-top table, I noticed. Ethan noticed me noticing. He came over. "Mara," he said, spreading his arms slightly. "You made it." "I said I would," I replied. He leaned in, lowering his voice. "Big moment tonight. I think you'll appreciate it." I didn't ask what he meant. Mom drifted toward the kitchen. I stayed near the hallway, where the noise softened and the walls still held Grandpa's old framed photos, black and white shots of construction crews, a faded picture of him in uniform, a photo of me and him at the county fair when I was 12. Ethan clinked his glass. The room quieted. Dad turned toward him, already smiling. "I just want to thank everyone for coming," Ethan began. "This house has been in our family for a long time, and while change is never easy, I believe in honoring the past while building the future." People nodded. Someone murmured approval. "I've been working on something," he continued, "that I think Grandpa would have been proud of." Dad's chest lifted slightly. Ethan gestured toward the wall where a framed photo of the house used to hang. It had been replaced with a mounted screen. "I've partnered with a local development group," he said. "We're turning this property into a mixed-use space. Retail on the ground floor, offices above, a plaque in the lobby to honor my grandfather's contribution to this community." A few people clapped. Dad looked like he might tear up. Ethan smiled wider. "I wanted to announce it here, with family, with witnesses." I shifted my weight. Mom had moved closer to the doorway between the kitchen and living room. Our eyes met briefly. She gave the smallest nod. Ethan went on, talking about permits, timelines, investment opportunities. He spoke with confidence, using words like portfolio and long-term vision. He looked at me once, mid-sentence. And none of this would be possible without the trust my family placed in me. The word hung there, trust. I reached into my bag and felt the edge of the folder. Dad raised his glass. "To Ethan," he said, "for carrying the family forward." More clapping. Ethan took a sip, then set his glass down carefully. "There's one more thing," he said. "Since this is about legacy, I thought it'd be meaningful to share something personal." He tapped his phone. The screen behind him changed. A scanned document appeared. "Grandpa's will. My name wasn't on it." Ethan pointed to the highlighted line. "Grandpa believed in clarity," he said. "He believed in choosing the right person for the right responsibility. I didn't make this decision. He did." He looked around the room, letting the implications settle. Some people glanced at me. Dad didn't. I stepped forward. "Not into the center, just enough to be seen." "Ethan," I said. My voice carried without effort. The room quieted again. He turned, surprised, but still smiling. "Yeah? Can you zoom in on the date at the bottom of that page?" A flicker crossed his face, confusion, then mild annoyance. "Why?" he asked lightly. "Just curious," I said. He shrugged and pinched the screen. The date enlarged. A woman near the couch leaned forward to look. "That's when Grandpa was already in the hospital," she said quietly. Ethan laughed. "Yeah." He signed it before things got bad. "We just filed it later." I nodded. "Can you show the next page?" I asked. Dad frowned slightly. Ethan hesitated. A half-second too long. "There isn't. It's a standard format," I said. "There's always a second page. Witness signatures. Notary stamp." The lawyer's wife was there. I knew because she'd introduced herself earlier. She shifted where she stood. Ethan clicked. The second page appeared. The stamp was there. The witness names were there. But the time was off. A man near the back spoke up. "That's odd," he said. "That notary's office closes at 4. That timestamp says 6:12 p.m. Ethan opened his mouth. Dad turned toward the screen. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't move closer. I reached into my bag and took out my laptop. I set it on the side table near the hallway, opened it, plugged in the USB. The familiar folders appeared. I turned the screen outward. Before we go any further, I said, I want to make something clear. Ethan's smile was gone now.
Dad took a step toward me. Mara? He said low.
This isn't the time. I met his eyes. This is exactly the time. Mom moved to stand beside me. I clicked on a file, but I didn't open it yet. Ethan looked around the room, at the faces, at the people who had come for a celebration, and were now leaning in, phones half raised without realizing it. He tried to laugh. You're making this weird, he said. This is a family thing. I nodded once. That's why I brought receipts. The word landed differently than shouting ever could. The room went completely still. I hovered my hand over the trackpad and waited, because Grandpa had taught me one last thing in those notes, in those files, in the way he'd split his legacy into what was visible and what was true. Timing isn't about speed, it's about witnesses. I looked around the living room, at Dad's colleagues, at Ethan's clients, at the neighbor who'd known Grandpa for 30 years, at the woman from the notary's office who now had her phone out fully. Then I clicked. But the screen didn't change yet, because before the first file opened, Ethan spoke. What are you doing? He asked. And for the first time that night, his voice wasn't confident. It was careful. I let the silence stretch, long enough for everyone to feel it. Long enough for Dad to look from me to the laptop to Ethan. Long enough for Mom to place her hand lightly on the back of my chair. Then I said, calmly, I'm about to show everyone what Grandpa didn't trust you to see. And the progress bar appeared on the screen. Halfway across, paused. The room leaned forward with it. The progress bar on the screen moved slowly, deliberately. I didn't speak. I didn't gesture. I let the files load, one by one, while the room's energy shifted from casual celebration to taut anticipation. People exchanged glances, murmurs running through the crowd like static electricity. Ethan's shoulders tightened. Dad's jaw clenched. Even the neighbors who had come out of idle curiosity leaned in. The first folder opened. Bank statements. Time-stamped entries showed transfers Ethan had initiated, sometimes without Grandpa's knowledge, sometimes attempting to consolidate funds into accounts he controlled. Each entry highlighted, precise, silent, undeniable. I didn't comment. I let the numbers speak. The second folder. Emails. Correspondence between Ethan and Grandpa, carefully drafted to make manipulation look like help. I scrolled slowly. The emails were polite, courteous on the surface, but underneath the undertone was clear. Pressure applied subtly, repeatedly. It's easier if we do it this way, Grandpa, one email said, and Dad agrees. The words hung in the air. They didn't need me to interpret them. Everyone reading them understood. Ethan's grin had disappeared. His drink sat untouched on the counter. He glanced at Dad, who had started pacing. The tension was tight enough you could hear the faint whir of the ceiling fan. Next, the audio files. Grandpa's own recordings, time-stamped and dated, played in the background. Ethan's voice, clearly audible, instructing, cajoling, sometimes insisting. One file had Ethan asking Grandpa to sign documents he didn't understand, while Dad's laughter echoed in the background. The files were raw, unedited, irrefutable. The crowd went quiet, letting the room absorb what it heard. I didn't rush, each piece of evidence layered on the last, building a pattern until there was no plausible alternative narrative. I didn't accuse. I didn't yell. I didn't even raise my voice above my normal calm. I clicked on the final folder, the legal trust. My name, fully documented, signed, notarized, dated long before Grandpa had even filed the main will that gave Ethan the visible inheritance. I turned the laptop slightly so everyone could see. This, I said softly, is what Grandpa trusted me with. Not Ethan, not Dad. Me. Murmurs spread. Phones rose recording. Some people gasped quietly. Others just stared. Ethan's face went pale. He looked at Dad. Dad looked at the screen. For the first time, the confidence that had been their armor all these years failed to hide the shock. You, Ethan stammered, trying to reclaim control. You can't. This doesn't. I let him trail off. No interruption. No mockery. Just the facts, the receipts, the documentation. Mom stepped forward. Calm, deliberate. Your grandfather knew what he was doing, she said, voice steady, and he wanted this kept private until you made your public claims. You ignored that. You assumed you owned it because of visibility, because of who everyone sees you as. That was never the plan. Dad's eyes shifted from Mom to me, and I could feel him processing every detail. The pride that had fueled his favoritism now collided with the reality he had chosen to ignore. He had spent decades celebrating confidence, loudness, and appearances, and now, quietly, in front of everyone, it was clear that competence and patience had outlasted them both. Ethan's lips pressed together. He glanced around the room, at the neighbors, the family, the colleagues, even the notary's wife who was taking photos.
The ripple effect of exposure was immediate. People realized this wasn't gossip.
This wasn't hearsay. This was proof, verifiable and documented. A long silence followed. I didn't fill it. I simply closed the laptop. The sound seemed to echo, not like a victory cheer, but like inevitability. Everyone who had come to witness Ethan's celebration now understood a different story. A story of quiet diligence, of overlooked effort, of patience rewarded in a way that could not be disputed. Ethan turned and walked toward the back of the room. His colleagues followed him in. Awkward, stilted silence. Dad lingered near the kitchen, shoulders tight, uncharacteristically still. He met my eyes briefly. No words passed. He didn't need to speak. I saw comprehension, regret, and recognition all in a single glance. Mom placed her hand lightly on my shoulder. Not congratulatory, not celebratory, just grounding. I didn't feel the need to speak. I didn't feel elated. I felt the same calm I had maintained all along. Later, when the room had emptied, Mom and I stood in the doorway. The evening air was cold, crisp. The lights of the city twinkled in the distance. "Are you going to tell anyone else?" she asked. "No," I said. "Let them see it for themselves." She nodded, approving. Grandpa would have liked that. We walked to the car in silence. No one followed us. No one tried to explain, apologize, or argue. The exposure had done its work. The truth had spoken. Over the following weeks, the ripple effects unfolded naturally. Ethan lost credibility among his colleagues and clients. Offers and opportunities that had hinged on trust evaporated. Dad grew quieter, more reflective, as if reassessing every choice he'd made in favor of appearances over judgment. I didn't gloat. I didn't brag. I moved forward calmly. I consolidated my accounts, confirmed property transfers, and ensured that everything was documented and legally binding. I paid attention to details Grandpa had prized: precision, patience, and integrity. Mom and I rebuilt routines we had almost abandoned in the shadow of Ethan's dominance. Weekends were spent tending to small personal projects, trips to Grandpa's favorite cafe, quiet dinners where we didn't talk about family politics. Boundaries were drawn, reinforced, respected, and through it all I understood something Grandpa had known long before anyone else in my family, that value isn't always in what is visible, in the applause, in the crowd. Sometimes it's in what you protect, nurture, and handle without spectacle. I never needed to see Ethan falter in anger or humiliation. I never needed to see Dad apologize. The consequences were self-evident. People saw them, people understood. And I rebuilt my life quietly, deliberately, with a patience that felt like inheritance itself. Sometimes when I walk past the new mixed-use development Ethan eventually completed, without any plaque, without fanfare, I smile slightly, not at him, not at what happened, but at the knowledge that all along the truth had been preserved, handled responsibly, and allowed to reveal itself at the right moment. I carry that calm with me, that control. That quiet satisfaction, not for revenge, not for display, but because some victories don't need to be loud, they only need to endure, and this one did.